Hey, co-reporters, welcome back to my channel. We've got a really big story coming up for you today. Today, I am joined by Alyte of LegalBytes, and together we are going to be discussing the legal woes that Prince Andrew has currently gotten himself wrapped up in. And then after that, we will very briefly be discussing Hannah Gutierrez Reed, who is the armorer from the set of Rust, who is now suing the ammunition company. But before we get into that, let me just bring up Alyte so that we can introduce her to the channel. Hi, Alyte.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this channel today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So for those who don't know, Alyte has a YouTube channel called LegalBytes, and I don't know how I found you, Alyte, but I went like down the rabbit hole and I've been binge watching all of your panel episodes. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started on YouTube?
Yeah, so I've been a licensed attorney since, I guess, I don't know, for at least over 5 years now. I don't know, I lost track. But I had previously had a job before the pandemic. Since then lost the job because of the pandemic. And then knew that I was going to be moving overseas. And decided to try something completely different while I was sort of figuring things out. And this sort of just became its own company, its own thing. And so LegalBytes is all about explaining the law one bite at a time. It's what I like to say. And it's the goal of it is to make the law more approachable, understandable, digestible, so that everybody can understand it. And so I like to look at a lot of the headlines, a lot of pop culture news, pop culture topics of all kinds, and just sort of break them down for people.
That's awesome. You know, I am so happy about the rise of attorneys and lawyers on YouTube talking about pop culture. This is incredible.
Yeah. It's been one heck of a ride. And it's obviously it's still going. So I'm very appreciative of it. And I feel like I got in at the right time.
Oh, absolutely. So what is like your pop culture background situation like? Are you like a Housewives obsessed? Are you a Britney obsessed? Like, what are you?
I am. So for a good long while, I was pretty Housewives obsessed. I haven't been following it much recently. But a lot of my stuff is like nerd stuff. Disney. I'm a Disney nerd. I'm a Marvel nerd. Like I grew up watching the X-Men TV show. I've got older brothers. So and my husband is a very big video gamer. So I end up just sort of absorbing the video game nerdism from him there. So but I love all of it. You know, I grew up listening to Britney Spears, just like, most people around my age. So, the whole conservatorship thing going on with her has been super interesting and obviously like very, very tragic for a lot of years. And it's still going. I mean, her sister's got that book coming out, and anyway.
Can you imagine, the fact that Jamie Lynn stayed silent for 13 years and now all of a sudden she wants to speak up. And of course, it's for profit, right? Because she's peddling a book.
I mean, you can't help but feel like maybe she and maybe the rest of the family, they all kind of had this awareness of like, oh, our source of income is being cut off very soon. Let's take one last attempt to juice this this fruit right here. See what we can get out of it. So that may not be the case, but that's definitely how it looks to the public.
Absolutely. And, heads up to everybody. Britney Spears just filed a cease and desist against Jamie Lynn Spears. Or she just sent a cease and desist letter. So I'm going to be actually covering that with another lawyer friend of mine, Stephanie from Unwind and Chill, at around 1 p.m. Eastern Standard. So right after this, if you guys are interested in that. And I have to get you, Alyte, on with Stephanie for a panel together. You guys would absolutely mesh so well together.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love that.
Awesome. So let's jump into this news. It's a little heavy, you guys. I have to warn you. By the way, hi, Jane, and hi, everybody. If you're enjoying this, please make sure to give the stream a thumbs up. And I did pin a link to Alyte's YouTube channel, LegalBytes, in the comment section and in the bio. So please, please, please check her out. So when it comes to Prince Andrew, right now, there's a woman named Virginia. I'm so bad at her name, Jeffrey, who is suing him. And she's claiming that she was sex trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein and that Prince Andrew had sex with her on multiple occasions. I believe it was 3 occasions when she was underage. I believe she was 17 years old. And, you know, I believe she's also claiming that he knew that she was underage when all of this was happening. So, Alyte, just like as a general overview, where are we in that case right now?
So, and one thing also for a little bit of context too, is this is also immediately following the Ghislaine Maxwell trial, which just happened, where she was convicted. There's some issues now since a juror spoke out, and so there may be some appealable issues in that case. But you know, so they've been sort of along this track of criminal and civil litigation for this whole issue. So in this particular case involving Prince Andrew, it's very early days. I can't remember exactly when Miss Jeffrey, I struggle like you do with her, her last name, but I don't know exactly when she filed her complaint. But that officially opens up the lawsuit. But Prince Andrew had filed after that a motion to dismiss. So for anyone that's not quite familiar with civil procedure, a complaint is what opens up a lawsuit, and after that, the defendant, who is sued, the person who's sued in the lawsuit, they're supposed to respond within a certain amount of time. With usually it's either called an answer or a motion to dismiss, and a motion to dismiss basically says, hey, Your Honor, even if we take all of these facts that were alleged by the plaintiff in this case, assume that they're all true, they don't meet the legal requirements of a lawsuit. And so therefore there's no reasonable way that a lawsuit could continue on this in this particular case. And it's always a purely legal argument. It's never factual. And so in this case, he filed a motion to dismiss, and the court analyzed it, and about a week ago or so, came out in a ruling overruling the motion to dismiss. So meaning that the case is moving forward. So now they're in the discovery stage, which means they are going to be requesting information from one another. And I've got to hand it to Ms. Jeffrey's legal team, because they were right on it immediately, getting discovery requests out there, getting subpoena requests through the Hague Convention, because there's some international third parties that they want to get information from. They're moving really quick.
And so what were the legal grounds that Prince Andrew filed the motion to dismiss on? And then what exactly can we expect to come out in the discovery phase?
So for the motion to dismiss, the core, I mean, he had a number of arguments for why, but the core of it was having to do with the lawsuit that Ms. Jeffrey filed against Jeff Epstein. So she filed a lawsuit against him. They had a certain amount of litigation between them, and then they ended up settling the case. So we don't necessarily know. I can't remember if we know how much she settled it for, or what exactly the terms were, because normally a settlement agreement has a confidentiality portion in it. So basically saying that if you're not one of the two parties or their lawyers or their tax people, for example, then you can't share that information. You're not supposed to give a copy of the settlement agreement to anyone else in the world. So, you know, beyond sometimes I've drafted these settlement agreements myself, and usually it'll say beyond naming the existence of a settlement agreement. So in that particular case, they had a settlement agreement. And so in this case, Prince Andrew was saying, well, you had a settlement agreement in there, and there were specific terms in there that said that this settlement agreement released not just Mr. Epstein, but also any other people who could have filed in this particular case. And so there was argument around that kind of term. And so the court, for several reasons, said, know that the existence of that settlement agreement between Mr. Epstein and Ms. Giuffre does not block her ability to sue Prince Andrew in this case. One of those is because of the fact that under Florida law,
Mhm.
if someone so only people that have a that have notice of a particular contract or agreement, settlement agreement is a contract in a way. Only people that have notice of it or have knowledge of it can enforce it. It sounds really like um, elementary, you could say, in some ways,
Yeah.
because it's like, obviously, like, how can anyone enforce it if they don't know about it? But in this case, it actually kind of pulled some weight because of the fact that technically there's a confidentiality agreement. No one should know about it. So
Mhm.
even if he actually did know about it, he wasn't supposed to. So therefore, he couldn't use it as a way to enforce that agreement as it relates to him. So that was one of the reasons why.
Oh my God, that's a little so Prince Andrew was not supposed to know about the settlement. By the way, you guys, the settlement I'm seeing was for $500,000.
There you go.
It was settled in 2009. So, are there any questions that might now be asked as they move along this process as to why Prince Andrew would have known about the settlement agreement? And is he sort of like, kind of like in a roundabout way, admitting that he was one of the people involved if he's trying to hide behind it as protection?
Um, no, I mean, you can't really use that as an admission by him. It's just a purely legal argument to say that, just taking strictly the contractual language in that agreement that says
Mhm.
that, anyone who could have filed in this case is effectively immunized, by the existence of the settlement agreement. And there were several other reasons too for why the court ended up overruling the motion to dismiss as to the settlement agreement argument that are still pretty detailed in civil procedure. So I'm trying to break it down a little bit so that it's not so much legalese, which is
Mhm.
sometimes sometimes harder than it should be.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, another reason is it has to do with the fact that the allegations in that lawsuit against Epstein are slightly different than the ones that the ones that are alleged in this lawsuit against Prince Andrew. Because
Mhm.
even though it's basically for the same core facts, right? Like we've got the same main allegations. Miss Giuffre she was a minor, she was trafficked. People did things to her that they shouldn't have, that no adult should have done to any minor.
Yeah.
Um, that's the core facts, right? The core allegations. Um, in the Epstein case, her lawsuit was basically for federal under federal law for allegations of specifically trafficking. But in this particular case, it's not trafficking; it's doing the deed itself. If that makes sense.
Okay. Yes, I
So,
understand. Yes.
so
Mhm.
because they're slightly different, the court said no. He like even so like even if he could have been if he did have notice of the settlement agreement, that he wouldn't have been a part of that particular lawsuit either, because of the fact that those claims were under specific statutes that didn't apply to him. They only applied to Epstein. So if there were two lawsuits brought against him and Epstein at the same time, they
Mhm.
would be separate lawsuits anyway. They wouldn't have
Oh,
been merged as one.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, there were a lot of little like technicalities here and there that he was trying to, kind of get off on as well, including the whole "I don't sweat" thing. But I did notice that there was something here. Oh, there was another one where he claimed he couldn't have slept with this woman on this certain day because it was his daughter's birthday, Princess Beatrice's birthday. And then last but not least, there was one where he claims that she is just trying to sue him. Let me pull this up because I don't want to get this wrong, but he accused her of being one of the people who was trying to lure underage girls into this situation, into this ring. Did you hear about
Okay.
that at all?
Yes, basically saying that she's basically guilty of doing the same thing,
Mhm.
but for other girls. Um, yeah, I understand that. I don't see that as a rebuttal that really should make any difference because it's not really relevant to the claim of whether or not he did the things that she alleges. So
Mhm.
anytime we're looking at any sort of defenses by a defendant in any case, or any allegations by a plaintiff in a case, we have to look at the evidence that they're looking for. We have to look at whether or not that would tend to make any material issue here more or less relevant, or more or less likely, I should say.
Is that like a
So
flying monkey situation? Like, look over there, squirrel or whatever?
yeah, yeah, and I think trying to be a little bit prejudicial about it sometimes. You're always going to try to drum up whatever bad facts about the other person that you can. I mean, not
Yeah.
all not all lawyers, not all parties in a lawsuit are going to try to do that to the worst extent, but it is potentially somewhat helpful if you can get bad evidence about the other person and to get it in front of a jury potentially.
Mhm.
So, not to say that that's proper because the rules of evidence try to keep out any kind of information that is overly prejudicial that's going to make a jury really dislike a particular party, especially when that information has really no bearing on any of the allegations or any of the true defenses here.
Okay. Now, Jane has a question. She's asking, is 17 under the age of consent?
So I believe in this particular case, she alleges that she was 17 at the time. I think 18 is the age of consent. It depends. It depends from state to state. Now, this is something that came up in the Ghislaine Maxwell trial as well, because I think New Mexico was where a lot of these alleged acts happened, and I think in New Mexico it's like 16, or it was 16 at the time. So in this particular case, I think that what we're talking about is strictly Florida law, and I think it's 18. I don't know for a fact though. So yeah.
Mhm. And isn't it also that, like, if you're 17 and your person is like within a reasonable age gap to you, like 18, 19, 20 or whatever, then it's completely different than this, where he's like 2 decades plus older than her, right?
Yeah, it does depend on the state. So those are, I think what you're referring to is Romeo and Juliet laws.
Yes.
Not every state has them, but
Mhm.
there are a number that do, where basically it says that if you're within a certain age range around 18 for both parties, that um technically it is statutory rape. However, when it comes down to the sentencing, usually it'll be a much reduced sentencing. So California in 2020 changed their laws somewhat, and there was a lot of controversy around it, but really what they were doing was they were extending the law that already existed for same-sex couples, or
Mhm.
for opposite sex couples to same-sex couples, and basically saying the same thing. Some laws also have harsher punishments depending on how young the victim is. If they're under 14, for example, it's much harsher punishments.
Understandably so. Um, Another defense that Prince Andrew has kind of tried to lean upon here, just to quote it directly from The Guardian, it says that the latest court documents contain a summary of Andrew's defense, which says that he contends that Ms. Jeffrey may suffer from false memories because her claims about the circumstances under which he allegedly assaulted her have repeatedly changed over the years. He's denying her accusations in full, and he believes that she claims to have been trafficked by Epstein in an effort to deflect from her own participation in his sex trafficking scheme. So now, when we go back to him claiming that her memory is faulty and he wants to look into that memory of hers, is it not already uncommon for memories to be faulty in general?
Yes, and that's a very ripe place for his legal team to attack her case, because the fact of the matter is, I mean, you're dealing with really two things here. There's memory and there's perception, and both of those can change over time. So
Yeah.
your memory, how well you recall the things. Perception is how well you actually perceived the things at the time that they
Mhm.
occurred. So, for example, let's say you have a victim who was at a frat party and she was drinking quite a bit. The presence of alcohol can affect someone's perception in any kind of a case. And here we're dealing with perception that could have been impacted by trauma, and it's also memories that are bound to be somewhat affected by time. And also perception can also be affected by the amount of time that has happened too. I mean, you think back on it's actually a little bit of a counterintuitive idea, but people think that when you have a very traumatic event, that you're likely to like have those memories seared into your brain, right? Like the idea that anyone on September 12th, 2001 ever thought that they would forget what they did on that day was like crazy, right? But there's a lot of there have been a lot of psychological studies about the fact that traumatic memories actually tend to shift more so than non-traumatic memories, and that's really because the brain has a way of trying to protect itself over time, right? You don't want to be plagued by traumatic memories throughout the rest of your life if you've gone through something. So it has a way of sort of shifting things over time. And so somebody can maybe not even realize how those change over time. The Ghislaine Maxwell trial dealt with the same sort of thing. But that's always going to be up to a jury to determine if things may have shifted over time for that particular victim or for any kind of a witness. And if so, how much can they rely on those different memories if they've changed and if they've changed in material ways, right? Because you can, let's say somebody there, let's talk about pulling from the Ghislaine Maxwell trial. There were victims who couldn't remember exactly how old they were at different times. They couldn't remember exactly what year things were going on. However, the jury basically found these witnesses and said, like, I really believe that something happened to them. And it's clear, maybe they weren't 14 or 15 or 15 or 16, but they were definitely underage at this time. So like, does it really matter to, how much they've forgotten about these certain things or how much they've gotten mixed up when the basic facts that we need in order to determine the outcome of this case are clear.
And so with that in mind, is there anything that can potentially help her in this case? Like, do you know if she has journal entries or anything like that? Like, because we know that Ghislaine and then Jeffrey, they kept diary entries and black books. Do we know if she was doing anything like that could help with the memory situation argument?
So that I don't know, but that you can also have other circumstantial evidence come in of different people that she was with at different times that sort of help to corroborate the things that she would be saying on the stand. So I don't know what kind of records that she may have been keeping, but that would certainly help. And also at the same time, in these kinds of cases, it's not uncommon for the plaintiff side to bring in expert witnesses as well, talking about if she's been treated over time, her treating doctor, talking about the trauma that she's talked about over years and years and years, and how certain things have stayed the same over time. Those are all points of interest that the jury can look to in helping to evaluate her testimony.
And can you take us through maybe why something like this would take so long to reach trial? So, for example, it seems like a lot of this stuff happened in the early 2000s, maybe late 90s as well. And it wasn't until recently that Jeffrey had his trial, then Ghislaine, she just wrapped up. And now Prince Andrew, his, first of all, is not criminal. I'm also interested in knowing why his is the only one here so far that is not criminal. But why, what is the, what takes so long? Have they already tried before and maybe certain things happened?
So I don't know if there were any attempts beforehand. I'm not entirely sure why it's taken as long as it has. I mean, obviously she had her prior lawsuit against Epstein that resolved in 2009. It could just be that ever since someone took a renewed interest in Epstein for his criminal case, that it just sort of like the dominoes just started falling around him. So, and this being a civil case, so when it comes to a criminal case, there has to be someone in the government that is deciding to bring those charges against that person. And it could very well be that that the government in this particular case decided that they were not so interested in bringing a criminal case against a member of the royal family of one of our absolute closest allies.
Yeah.
So that could very well be. And now that he's technically no longer a member of the royal family, that may change. Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
So
So it makes me so sad, right? Like that all of this might have or allegedly happened, or that he at least was surrounding himself with this company. And the idea that a government would not want to protect someone who was a child at the time when these things were happening is solely politically based, or could be very heavily politically based. I mean, it's very sad.
yeah, I mean, yeah, but that's kind of the nature of a lot of these criminal cases. Unfortunately, is the decision to charge someone or not charge someone.
Yeah.
When we're talking about state crimes, like your average, burglary, murder, etc., like that comes down to usually the DA, and they're usually elected in most places, and so the decision comes down to them. So a lot of times, unfortunately, it is a political decision. In this case, I'm not saying that 100% it is, but it wouldn't surprise
It
me
wouldn't
if it
surprise
were.
me either.
Yeah.
Yeah, very sadly so.
Yeah.
Now, I believe so. Speaking of the royal family here, so do we know, if you were to ballpark it, about how much would it cost for Prince Andrew to defend himself in this kind of a case?
Oof. I mean, I don't particularly know, but I would not be surprised if it was well over hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, because I'm assuming that they would be leaving no stone unturned.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of potential witnesses that are international witnesses, and so that takes uh, just trying to get everyone in the room for a deposition, for example. You have
Hmm.
potentially have people, fly. I mean, at least before the pandemic anyway, you would have people flying from one location to another. Now, there's you can do depositions by video conference and whatnot. And so there are a lot of cases that do that. So that wouldn't surprise me either in this case if they did have depositions by video conference. But there's a lot to go over. I would anticipate that there would be probably a lot of fights between the two parties as well. I mean, just
Yeah.
given the early motion to dismiss, which that doesn't surprise me either. And I think, and I also would like to say that I think that the fact that the taking away of his title came right on the heels of his losing the motion to dismiss is
Yeah.
not, it's kind of shocking, but it's not terribly surprising when you really think about it, because at least while there was that motion to dismiss, there was a possibility that this case could just be thrown out. But now that this case is officially moving forward because the court has said so, he's tied into discovery, which means he as an individual is required to respond to her request. There are demands that will be made that he can't just say, sorry, I'm not going to do it.
Hmm.
Because there would be all kinds of legal fallout from the court. And it's, number one, there's the royal family, of course, is they have always been very, you could, from an American perspective, at least, it looks like they've always been very sensitive to embarrassment. And so this kind of a case, there, that could probably be part of it. But I think a large part of it too is this awkwardness, this tension of having technically a member of foreign sovereignty being pushed around by an American judge, is a potentially awkward situation,
Hmm.
diplomatically speaking. So the fact that he sort of got himself into this situation where he has criminal allegations against him that are egregious, and that he is going to be essentially told what to do by a foreign government, in some respect, is one of those situations that it doesn't surprise me that the royal family ultimately, or that the queen ultimately decided, we've got to
Yeah.
cut you loose.
Well, with like the sensitivity to embarrassment and everything that's coming out and is bound to come out as well,
Yes.
do you see him maybe trying to get a gag order put on the case at some point?
I wouldn't be surprised if he tried, but there are some very, very strong limitations on that, because, so for anyone that's not familiar, a gag order is basically where one of the parties asks for it, and then the judge, if they decide to do it, they require the other side not to talk to the public, essentially. And it is it's a very, very heavy burden to put on a party, and in a place where we have very, very strong First Amendment rights for free
Mhm.
speech. Courts are incredibly careful, and usually they heavily emphasize the um, the default basically is that they reject it. So they have to have certain factors that they have to meet, in order for that gag order to go forward, and it's a heavy burden.
Really? So if she is it possible that someone on the other side would be like, I do not want a gag order on this. I want all of this to be out in the public record. Would that be one of the things that maybe would prohibit a gag order from being put into place as well?
So I can actually read you the factors for it.
Yes,
So there's a
please.
there's a case from the Supreme Court, and actually, if you'd like, I can share my screen, um, if you want. Let's see here. Da, da, da. Here we go. Okay. So, if I have, yeah, there you go. So, it's this case, Nebraska Press Association v. Stewart, where the Supreme Court considered the following factors in analyzing the constitutionality of a gag order. So, the first element that they would have to meet is they would have to talk about the nature and extent of pretrial news coverage. So, if there hasn't been much publicity of the case prior to this, and not many details are known, then that's going to tend towards uh, um, that would allow them to trend towards allowing the gag order. So, but in a case like this where there has been a lot of publicity already, probably not. That would be an element that would be disfavorable to having a gag order here.
Mhm.
Part B is whether other measures they would be likely to mitigate the effects of unrestrained pretrial publicity. So, in other words, the court is always going to look for other ways that they can restrict certain information from getting out. So, for example, when the parties are making requests for information, they're going to be very specific about what they're asking for, and in and usually there's a lot of back and forth between the parties in the discovery process. It's outside of the court usually. Like the judge doesn't want to get involved in these kinds of back and forth, unless there's a real issue and they have to have a decision made by a judge.
Mhm.
But usually it's like, if I have, let's say I have, I'm a party is requesting information from my client, and I know that information is pretty sensitive. It has, all kinds of social security information, or medical information that's super private. There are ways of protecting that information and still getting it over to the other side, so that you can move forward with the litigation, and get all of the evidence out there that should be out there.
Mhm.
Um, so if there are other ways of restricting certain information from getting out to the public, the court is going to be much more likely to use those methods rather than a generic gag order.
And so can this can a civil case, actually I feel like I know the answer because of the Cardi B situation, but is there going to be a jury or something like that? Is that why they would want this sort of information to not go out to the public?
Yes, and that actually is that's another big reason why, or that's one reason why they would allow for a gag order, right? Is because they would want to prevent it from spoiling the jury pool. So any of these big national cases that where people are reading, the headlines for a long time. Let's say, the George Floyd case, the Ahmaud Arbery case, the Kyle Rittenhouse case. These are cases that people have been hearing about for a very, very, very long time. And so depending on, how much somebody's paid attention to the case leading up to being called as a juror, you could potentially be spoiled and be prejudiced going into service as a jury. So that kind of widespread information can really it can really hurt the court's process in trying to seat a good jury because they need enough people in the pool to be able to seat them.
Wow. So this is going to be, so do we know at this point whether or not if they make it to trial, it will have a jury? Because this is very interesting. I'm wondering how they would be able to get a jury for this, because it's a huge story. Everybody knows about Epstein. Everybody knows about Ghislaine. Everybody knows about Prince Andrew's connection. There are other people, I believe Bill Clinton as well, who have been connected, and everybody has been talking about it. So how does this happen?
They've got to try to find people that don't know about it. Which it seems nuts, especially when when you're tapped into channels like these, like my channel, like your channel, and we're talking about this kind of stuff a lot. It seems like how would anybody not know about it? But it's amazing. You can find people that really don't. I mean, the same is true of any high profile case, and that's why the process of seating a jury is really, really important, because both in that process, it's called voir dire or voir dire, depending on what region of the country you're in. I went to law school in Texas, and there they basically said in Texas, if you're in state court, it's voir dire. If you're in federal court, it's voir dire. Because it can differ even within a state. But anyway, I usually personally pronounce it voir dire, but that's the process of seating a jury. And so in that process, you've got to be very careful about the kinds of questions that you ask, because you really want to ask good questions that will give you a sense of whether or not somebody knows about it, whether or not somebody has any opinions about it, because somebody cannot really know much about it and still have opinions about it, right? And and if they do have opinions about it, if that's something that they would be able to, set aside or, but typically courts are going to try to stay away from people anyway that have any kinds of opinions on these kinds of cases.
So what would be his ideal type of a jury? Like, what do you think his attorneys would be kind of like trying to hone in on? Mainly men, mainly older men?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say because, we can look at people as demographics, but that's not always the most accurate way of sort of separating people out, right? Just like, in a case like in actually these kinds of cases, not necessarily, these sort of cases involving minors, but in a generic rape case, typically I've heard from defense attorneys that or prosecutors, I should say, that you don't necessarily want to have women on a jury in a rape case, even though you would think that they would be more sympathetic. But when those jurors are put in that box and they are evaluating the evidence, they're evaluating her testimony, going over everything that happened to her, sometimes things can be too close for comfort. And so you can kind of start to think, well, I wouldn't do that if I were in that case, and be a little bit overly judgmental on her decisions. So I don't know how much that would play into a case involving minors, because she was quite young beforehand, while this all was going down. But I wouldn't be terribly surprised if there were, men who particularly men who are fathers, who would be looking at Prince Andrew in the situation and being like, you did what? You put yourself in what kind of situation? But again, it's hard to say on a very generic basis how much that would actually pull weight. You really have to ask like directed questions about their individual experiences, and about their perceptions, their ways that they see the world, essentially.
Wow. Well, you are right, and you did actually kind of opened my eyes to something when you're talking about the women and how women might be a little bit harsher or more judgmental. I do believe that's true. And I do believe that we have seen examples of that already play out online in certain other situations.
Mhm.
So, guys, when it comes to this case, we're going to have to just keep an eye on it. Do you know when there's going to be any other dates of interest, any other updates, what's coming up down the pipeline?
So there was a hearing yesterday, I believe. I've been following one guy, Inner City Press on Twitter. He has been in the courtroom and
Mhm.
tweeting out all of their hearings. So he's a really great resource to follow in case anybody is interested. But it's one thing that was kind of weird that came up in a hearing I think yesterday was about a one of these Kazakh oligarchs from Kazakhstan apparently had bought Prince Andrew's main home some years ago, and this was already known for a long time apparently, but it's gotten renewed interest, I think, because of things that are going on in Kazakhstan.
Mhm.
There's been protests and things like that, and so now there's some interest in it because it looks like that purchase, which he bought it way overvalued above what the market I guess was showing that it should have sold at. So it's a little
Mhm.
bit of a suspicious purchase. So what people are starting to say is, there's investigations going into it now, but whether or not that was money laundering. So there could be even more issues coming out of this case for Prince Andrew, even beyond just this civil litigation.
So that kind of reminds me of the situation where Donald Trump had a situation with someone from Russia or something on a piece of property where something like that was also being intimate. So has the oligarch has he been implicated in any way at up until this point?
I don't think that I don't know that this is the first that I've heard of him, so I don't think that he has any sort of implication in the actual underlying claims
Yeah.
by Miss Jeffrey, but I think that this is just information that sort of came out in the process of discovery just with other stuff. So this is something that is always, this is one of the reasons why anyone that really wants to get rid of a case really wants to get rid of it at the motion to dismiss stage, because as soon as you get into discovery, it's a very open process.
Yeah.
It's really hard to withhold information, because it really,
Mhm.
if it has any possibility of it leading to information that could be relevant, like it's not even like this information itself is relevant, but if it could lead to information that's relevant, then it usually
Yeah.
needs to be provided to the other side. So it's a very open process, it's very invasive.
Mhm.
And so I would not be surprised if a lot of weird things came out as a result.
So, with that in mind, by the way, hello to everybody who just joined. Hi, Chayo. Hi, Ramster. Hi, Lauren. Thank you guys all so much for being here. If you are enjoying the show, as Rogue House says, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. And I've also pinned in the chat box a link to Alita's YouTube channel. She talks about this stuff all the time. She is a lawyer. She is so good. And she loves pop culture just like us. So, it's the perfect mix. So,
Absolutely.
in the interest of how all of this stuff might come out in the future, now that like the motion to dismiss has not been granted, what could Prince Andrew do to get rid of this? Maybe the gag order might not be applied. So will he just ignore it and go to default judgment? Would he try to settle the way Epstein settled with her before? What do you think his strategy might be at this point to protect himself?
Well, he could potentially go for default if he were just to sort of walk away. Ultimately, what would happen is there would be all kinds of sanctions. Like you said, it could result in what's called a default judgment, where basically the court says, because of the fact that you have decided to not participate, you automatically lose. The
Yeah.
problem with that is that he's still potentially, well, he still would be on the hook for all of the damages that Miss Jeffrey has alleged through her complaint. So a complaint doesn't necessarily always list specific damages, like an actual number that they want to say at the very beginning of, how much they think that they have suffered and what that money number is. But
Yeah.
usually you can kind of estimate at least a floor based on the allegations in the complaint. And I would not be surprised if that number was sky high, if he walked
Mhm.
away and there was a default judgment, and she would just say like the sky's the limit for what what I'm entitled to.
Yeah,
Um,
and it should be.
so yeah, so that would be, I think honestly the realistically the best thing for him in this particular case, or maybe not the best thing. I don't know the actual facts on his side that have not been uncovered, right? So being somewhat of an outsider in this case with a legal background, I would personally say that most likely his best alternative, if assuming that he doesn't just fight it tooth and nails until she runs out of money or something,
Mhm.
there's basically two options: try to bury her in legal fees so that she really can't afford her attorneys anymore, or try to settle it as early as possible so that there's less time for discovery, less time for information to get passed back and forth, less time for that information to be made public. So that would be my thought, is that if I were if I were his attorney, I might recommend to him to settle as early as possible, depending on
Mhm.
whatever the facts are, what they know.
Are you surprised that he didn't settle it before it hit the court? I wonder if her team would have already tried to reach out to him or something, like just to let them know that a lawsuit was coming, and if he had the opportunity already to settle outside of this.
So it's not uncommon for a lawsuit to be preceded by a demand letter. So
Mhm.
I've sent demand letters before filing litigation in particular cases where you basically outline your all of your claims, all of your facts, the law, and everything, and say, hey, guess what? If this goes to a lawsuit, we're likely to prevail. So here's how much we anticipate it's worth. If you want to settle it early, we can give you a reduced rate. Essentially, we'll give you a discount for
Yeah.
not making us go through the whole process of actual civil litigation. But so I wouldn't be surprised if there was that conversation ahead of time, but
Mhm.
it doesn't always result in a settlement. So
Yeah.
if either if there was a demand letter like that was sent to him and then he responded with pound sand, I'm royalty, I can do whatever I want, then they could have just filed. Or there's also the possibility that they talked about it, they negotiated it, and he said, no, I'm royalty, you don't deserve that amount of money from me.
Wow. I was writing down earlier because I really wanted to get back to this. Guys, I know we're supposed to do the Hannah Gutierrez read, but like this is so juicy right now. Um, Alyte, I was wondering, you were talking about how there was some financial stuff uncovered. I really want to look into that after this because that's crazy.
Yeah.
So if it is found that there was some sort of money laundering going on, what could happen? Could he be criminally charged at this point, him and the oligarch?
It would depend on how much he knew, right? Because you
Mhm.
could be, it's if you're selling your house, you don't necessarily know everything there is to know about the person that's buying it from you.
Mhm.
And and sometimes when you're selling it, and especially, if you have any idea about about who that person might be, maybe you ask even fewer questions, precisely
Yeah.
because of those kinds of reasons. So there's a decent possibility that maybe he just didn't know about what was actually going on the other side of that transaction, or maybe he knew exactly what was going on
Mhm.
and was participating. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of sniffing around in that sort of transaction to see if it becomes something that becomes further investigated. We'll see.
Yeah. That's juicy. It's so interesting to me how there's so much like insidious stuff going on in that family, but all you ever hear about is what, the two who mind their own business are up to. It's fascinating. Um
Yeah,
so
yeah.
now, you guys, really quickly, let's get into this Hannah Gutierrez Reed story just to kind of make sure that we cover it before we head out of here. So, Alyte, what do you think about this right now? It's turning out that Hannah Gutierrez Reed is now trying to sue the manufacturer of the ammunition that was provided to her and the Rust film crew for the set. She's saying that they allegedly mixed live ammunition with a dummy rounds. So do you have any kind of insight onto that story?
Yes. So having read the complaint, There's a lot in there that is I'll say from a professional standpoint. I never want to demean other esteemed members of the bar, right? Like other
Yeah.
lawyers. But this particular complaint was not drafted that well. There's a lot of allegations in there that are worded in ways it's like, well, how would you know that? How would you know about this conversation between two other people? You haven't established, what gave rise to that conversation and how you would know about it. There's a lot of allegations like that are in this complaint. So it seems to me that this complaint is possibly a legitimate opening of a civil lawsuit, alleging these claims against the prop producer, right, or the people that was providing props for the set, and particularly the ammunition props. It could be that it's a legitimate lawsuit for that purpose, but I think that there's a much larger purpose here, which is kind of a not a PR stunt, but a piece of PR.
Mhm.
Because in this case, a lot of people have been asking a lot of questions. There's been a lot of conversations about this whole case, about the shooting, ever since like the day that it happened. And Alec Baldwin, it's no secret that people have been talking a lot about the comments that he's made to various
Mhm.
parts of the press, on Instagram, to George Stephanopoulos, sitting down for an interview. And if you talk to any lawyer about that, about his behavior so far, they would say, most likely, I would think that they would say that's a huge risk. He really shouldn't be talking to the press. I
Mhm.
mean, he's giving so much
He's acting
information.
like he's cleared already, right? And he's not. Like he just had to turn over his cell phone just the other day, didn't he?
Yes. Yeah, and he was saying for a while, like, we're complying with this warrant for the cell phone, but they weren't exactly complying, technically speaking. They were going through a certain process where they were sort of they were making the police department jump through certain hoops, which are legitimate, right? Because
Mhm.
every person that has any kind of a touch point with the police has absolutely every right to make sure that the police follows, certain procedures to make sure that their rights aren't infringed. But in this case, it was just his statements to the press on that were a little bit different than how to accurately describe that process. Could be that he's just not a lawyer and he's just not explaining it as artfully as a lawyer would be, um,
Mhm.
or uh, or maybe he's just sort of bloviating. That's another possibility always. But in this case, it's like he's really the only one that's been talking to the media, and he's been talking a lot to the media.
Mhm.
So in with this lawsuit that was filed by Hannah Gutierrez Reed, you basically have a very, very long timeline of facts that no one really knew before this point. At least no one in the public knew before this point about this sort of drama going on in the props department between her and the other two girls that were working with her there, and then the this Seth. I can't remember his last name. I have it pulled up here, but
Yeah.
uh what is his name? Seth Kenny, sorry. So of PDQ Arm and Prop. So this drama about certain things that were going on there that could have led to a potential uh, essential sabotage, or a pointing of fingers that would, after the fact, to sort of have a fall guy for what
Yeah.
happened. Um, so the fact that it's a 24-page complaint, and 20 pages of those 24 pages are just facts. It's factual allegation. That's pretty telling to me that this is just someone who wanted to get her story out. And this is actually one of the safest ways that you can do it, because number one, it's obviously cleared by attorneys, because the attorneys are the ones that are drafting this document. So you don't have the risk of having Alec Baldwin and George Stephanopoulos, and George turning to Alec and with some kind of a question, and then Alec saying like, I was pulling back the hammer and then it dropped and then the gun went off, and all these different details that he gave in that
Now bound
interview.
to. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Bound to in the public. Because who knows how much of what Alex said was actually sort of run down by his attorneys to say, like, okay, fine, talk about this, but don't talk about this. Like
Yeah.
I would hope or think that his attorneys would have at least had a conversation with him about, like, these are the risks that you're running here. This is what we would very much prefer that you not talk about,
Hmm.
all of it. But if you have to, maybe, limit it to such and such.
Yeah.
Um, but in this case with Hannah Gutierrez Reed, you have a very long fact pattern where she goes through the whole timeline, even, going leading up to it, the day of the shooting, afterwards, things that have been going on that are highly suspect in her opinion. And even though there's a lot of accusation, supposition, and basically hearsay, he said, she said, that's alleged in the complaint,
Hmm.
it's a well enough drafted complaint that it would probably survive a motion to dismiss, in my opinion. So it would probably continue on to
Really?
discovery.
Hmm.
And it basically, like, it gets her side of the story out, without the risk of somebody asking her directly a question that she would fumble over and potentially say something wrong or otherwise damaging in a way that would lock her down, in the same way that Alec Baldwin is locked down in several comments.
And so, who are the other defendants in this? Because she was talking about how the suppliers had allegedly mixed the ammunition live and dummy, but then she also talks about how Halls allowed Alec Baldwin to point at Helena Hutchins, and then she also complains about how Alec Baldwin um, ignored her emails when she wanted to be there and, like, coach him just before it and everything like that. So it sounds like
Yeah.
there's not just the ammunition company that she's pointing fingers at here.
So right, and that's one of the other things that's very interesting. So Seth Kenney is the owner of PDQ Arm and Prop LLC, so the company. So it's basically it's him and the company are one and the same. They're the only
Mhm.
defendants in this lawsuit, but there are other civil lawsuits that have been filed in this case by other people. And it is interesting that she, that she really goes through all of those details with David, and that's another reason why I think that this is really a more of a PR move than anything else, is because she's talking about kind of pointing fingers at David Halls, pointing fingers at Alec Baldwin, saying, hey, he was supposed to show up for an October 15th training on cross draws. He never showed up. And then, when everybody was practicing it, nobody told me. I should have been there in the room, particularly because he didn't show up there.
Yeah.
And I had asked for somebody to tell me if he was going to show up with this gun, and whatnot. So it's like I said, it's very much giving her side of the story. Whether or not that's accurate, we don't know, because in a complaint, you allege facts from your perspective.
Mhm.
And so the facts that are alleged are one side of the story, and one side of the story only. There's always another side to it. And so there could be, maybe Seth Kenney will respond and say, well, actually, that's not how things were at all, and here's my side of the facts. And then maybe that'll be a much more compelling story, or be backed up by much more compelling evidence. But there were some very damaging text messages that were shown in this complaint as well. So,
Oh, could you give us a little overview on those text messages? I am not aware.
yes. So I can actually, I can share my screen again, if you want.
Yes, please.
Let's see here. Okay, here we go.
Let me add it in.
So let me try to zoom in here. So this is kind of where the drama sort of starts between Seth and Hannah,
Mhm.
where Hannah had gotten into a disagreement, we'll say, with Sarah. The other, technically her supervisor is Sarah, in the props department. There was some sort of a discharge of a firearm when Sarah was holding it, and so Hannah told her, hey, we've got to tell production about this, because this was an unintentional discharge, and we've got to tell production. It's a safety issue. You may or may not be able to handle guns after this because of it, which is actually
Mhm.
that would be a very responsible thing to say and do. That's what we should hope that any armorer on set would say and would follow up on.
Mhm.
So then I guess Sarah relayed that to Seth. Seth then brought it up to Hannah, and here's some text messages where
And
they
then who's
were.
in gray and who's in blue? Sorry.
Yeah, so in gray is Seth and in
Mhm.
blue is Hannah. So in case anybody can't see it, so in gray, Seth says accidental discharges are accidents. A mistake is where the armorer provides a gun and full load ammo to be fired with a horse in the vicinity. Will you tell production about that? We learn to move on, and don't forget she's your boss. Don't push it. And then Hannah responds, "Excuse you? What mistakes do you think I'm making? Will I tell production about what? You think I'm I'll censor myself here on your channel. You think I'm some effing rat or something? You think I'm running to production to tattle? You have me effed up, Seth. If she doesn't like me, then when I barely said anything about it, you can come back and finish the show. I'm not going to stay where I'm an effing problem."
This is
So
so
that was the
unprofessional. This exchange is
yes.
so unprofessional. Yeah.
Yes. So this is already that was before all of that happened, before Helena Hutchins was shot, and everything. So this is already like there was tension on set between these individuals already. Um so then then there's some other text messages about the rounds between them, because there's a lot of discussion about the shell casings and how you can tell the difference between them.
Mhm.
So I'll skip past that one, but this one, this is the juiciest one right here. So this is where um basically she says that he tries to encourage her to go to the police and point fingers at other people for it, to blame other people for what happened, and essentially to make things up also. So
In writing, he said this?
yes, it's the dumbest thing. If you're ever like, first off, don't ever try that anyway. But if you are
Yes.
going to, like, at least be smart about it and don't do it in writing, because someone is, and especially in a situation where you have someone who is already kind of at odds with you, like, that they're
Mhm.
going to take screenshots of it, right? Like, that
Yes.
like it's not going to stay between you and her. It's very strange. So I'll read the text message between them here too, where so in blue, this is Hannah again. She says, "Come." You can't really see the full text, but it looks like she says, "Come forward for what? What should I be confessing to?" And then he has this whole long text here in gray that says, "Go and talk to the police. Tell them everything. Answer every question down to what you had for breakfast. You're young, certainly not green or inexperienced with period weapons, but did you get rolled over by the set system and with the AD, that's the or the assistant director, with 30 plus years of experience? I think you did, and you're too proud to say that." Basically saying like, "Hey, did you do this? Like, I think so. Hey, go tell people. This is you're coming up with this storyline, right?" And then he goes on, he says, "Had you been partnered up with a truly professional assistant director, none of this would have happened. That true professional would have supported your safe efforts. Instead, you got David Reckless Halls. No AD is ever to touch a gun. How many times had he grabbed guns from you? If he did it once before and you didn't kick his teeth in, you got rolled. Had you ever watched your dad hand off guns to an AD?" And the background to this is Hannah's dad is Thel Reed, who's been an armorer for a long, long time in Hollywood. And then he goes on, "You're tough, but there's always someone out there that's more intimidating. Who are you to question him? Please think about this. Take some time." And then he even goes to her dad,
Oh my God.
to Thel Reed. And he says, by text message, "There was nothing to be gained by Hannah and her attorneys dragging me into this. If anything, the DA may perceive this is an unapologetic scapegoat tactic, and lower the boom even harder. You and I will be collateral damage in this tragedy and approach. It makes no sense." So basically trying to tell her, "Hey, you need to go and point fingers at other people so that it doesn't look like you did this thing or any of us did this thing. It's solely that guy over there." And Mr. Reckless over there. And never mind the earlier text message, of course, where Seth was saying, "Hey, you need to let it go about this whole safety issue that you
Yeah.
had with Sarah." So interesting, very interesting. There's a lot that's suspect in this case.
Mhm.
Um, And it also goes on to allege that he was involving himself in the investigation where he wasn't supposed to be involved.
Oh my
He
God.
apparently wasn't supposed to have the code for the prop truck, which is where all of these things were locked up, all the guns
Yeah.
and the ammunition. And yet somehow he ended up with the code, and then ended up allowing the police to come in and inspect it later on,
Mhm.
himself opening it up without Hannah or anyone else there, I guess. So there's a lot. Like, how is he getting certain pieces of information? How is he getting access to different things? And then how is he involving himself in ways?
Mhm.
It seems very, very suspect. And so this is, like I said, like, this is the first time that a lot of this information has come out to the public. The police probably already know about this information. It would really surprise me if she filed this lawsuit and didn't talk to the police beforehand, because um from all appearances, she's been cooperating with the police for
Mhm.
all of their requests. Like, she handed her phone over without asking for a warrant. She's been, it seems like, cooperating.
That's incredible because you know what? When this all came out, she was the first one that everybody in the public kind of scapegoated as the reason for the situation. But now, as more information comes out, the Seth guy is unwittingly making himself like prime suspect number one.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, it's really easy for, I mean, it's natural to look at her particularly in this case, because she's the armorer, right? Like, so
Hmm.
on set, she's supposed to be the one that is overseeing the firearms that are used as props on set. And so that's a very hefty burden to have, because there's massive safety issues surrounding all of those firearms. So,
Hmm.
when there's something that goes wrong with one of those, it makes sense that she's the first person to look to, beyond the person that's actually holding it, right?
Yeah.
But it's very interesting. She also talks about how she also alleges in there that the set was rushed and chaotic. I will note that some of the reporting seemed to be attributing her allegation of the set being rushed and chaotic, and saying that she was alleging that it was rushed and chaotic because of Seth Kenny and the prop company. That doesn't seem to be the case from my reading of it. She's just saying,
Hmm.
generally speaking, it was a low budget film. People were trying to run around and get things done quickly, do more with less. She had multiple roles that she was having to jump back and forth between, and as were other people as well. So this kind of created what she says is a perfect storm
Hmm.
of events. So
You guys, this is absolutely incredible. Alita from LegalBytes. So she's been covering this case from start, and I can't say finish because it's still going. Um, Over on her channel, she regularly has a lot of other lawyers commentating alongside her. So please make sure I've pinned a link to her channel in the comment section. So please make sure that you subscribe to her channel for a lot more legal commentary, pop culture commentary, you name it, straight from a lawyer. Alita, thank you so much for having joined
yeah,
us. This is incredible.
of
Seriously.
course. Thank you so much for having me. This has been really great.
I'm glad. We have to have you on again because this was just too damn good. You guys, you know where to find me. You're already here. Please, if you enjoyed this stream, make sure to give it a thumbs up so you continue to get my videos, our videos into your subscription feeds, and into your homepages and everything like that. And again, subscribe to Alita's channel, Legal Bites, for more legal information explained just so chef's kiss easily for us to understand. Okay.
Thank you. And thanks so much for having me. I would love to be back.
Awesome. We'll have you back for sure. You guys, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Okay. Bye.